This session will focus on the theme, the future of capitalism, the world economy, business, and world peace. And now, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. First, Mr. John ROOS, a former U.S. ambassador to Japan. The former president, CEO, and senior advisor at S&P Global, Mr. Douglas Peterson. And executive director of the International House of Japan, Dr. Ken JIMBO. The Tokyo Bureau Chief of Financial Times, Mr. Leo Lewis. And Professor Noriyuki YANAGAWA of Graduate School of Economics, the University of Tokyo. We are honored to welcome these 5 esteemed guests to the stage. Now for this session, Professor YANAGAWA will serve as the moderator. Professor YANAGAWA, the floor is yours. I'm YANAGAWA of the University of Tokyo, and I'm going to serve as the moderator. Thank you very much. Well, okay, we were just wondering which language we should use. My introduction and also as well as the concluding remark will be in Japanese. But for the rest of the part, including discussions, majority of the persons are the English speakers, so the rest will be carried out in English, so all mixed up. So maybe you have to use your microphone from time to time, earphone from time to time for simultaneous interpretation. And at the outset, we have listened to the Hiroshima Declaration, which is quite important. And Marx Gabriel, the keynote lecture was given just now. And this is really the very first session after these 2 events. And roughly, we're going to take up 3 things. First, executive committee members. We have 2 executive committee members in this session. Therefore, I know that they have passions for that. So I hope that as members of the executive committee, they're going to talk about all the things which are concerning the Hiroshima Declaration. And the second point, which is that from the beginning, we have listened that in the world economy and international relations, we have faced with very difficult situations, I believe. So under the current international circumstances, have that the panelists are going to make analysis on the current conditions of the world. And the third, under those circumstances, the overall objective of the forum is that in a business, the corporations, those entities, what kind of contribution they can make to peace. So this is another topic that we'd like to take up in our discussion. Instead of me talking in length, but I just would like to talk about peace and economy and interrelations of those. Okay, ESGP, which is the very important keyword which is mentioned in the Hiroshima Declaration. In that regard, the economy and the business in which the role of peace has been highlighted, I think. On the other hand, in the economic activities, the peace and how peace can be an important foundation is, under those circumstances, current circumstances, it has become really evident and clear that peace is important. Unless we are in the peaceful environment, exports and imports, we're not able to make it possible. And also the economy itself is going to be contracted or maybe disrupted. So in that regard, the impact of peace upon economy is extremely important. That I'm sure everybody is aware of. On top of that, there was another direction that I'd like to mention, which is that from the business side and also the corporation side, the contribution to peace is actually required. Is another point I'd like to mention. ESG, for example, or the issues of environment. In business and also in corporate activities, we really have to tackle the environmental problems, issues. Those are clearly recognized. But in the past, if you look back, those things, those things were decided outside the companies. And corporate activities were to maximize the profit regardless of an environment in the past. But now, the stakeholder capitalism is an expression which is not for the sake of shareholders, but for the environmental society. We really have to make contributions which are required for corporations, which has become the popular concept. And as an economist, I just please, if I may use the economic terms, the environment is really the public goods that we have to protect. And for that, each company and each individual and consumer really have to make contribution to support the public goods. That is really the understanding which has become widely permeated. In the similar regard, this peace in our activities, we have to make contributions. We have to support peace. That would eventually turn to the better sustainability in the society as a whole. That has been finally recognized. And in the Hiroshima Declaration, hope that this concept is going to be further spread. Well, I have talked a bit too much, but hope that we have the great panelists and discussants, and hope that we will be able to deepen our discussions in this session. Thank you very much. Now, sorry, I think I need to switch gears.
So, first of all, Ambassador ROOS, could you tell us about your view about current international relationship, the international capitalism? So, could you show me that?
Well, first of all, Professor, thank you for your opening remarks, and Governor Yuzaki, Ninami-san, distinguished guests. Let me just start out by saying it's an incredible honor to be here in Hiroshima, which is a place near and dear to my heart. Hiroshima's legacy teaches us that even after an unimaginable destruction, we can rebuild and create a better future through unity and purpose. Today, we're all gathered in that spirit, determined to connect business and peace building in a meaningful way, and to honor as well Hiroshima's legacy of peace through action. The purpose of this forum, which is so important, is to explore how business can contribute to global peace. It's founded on a crucial premise, that traditional shareholder capitalism, with its more narrow focus on profitability, has sometimes led to negative consequences, intended or unintended. To address these challenges we face, companies must, and I emphasize must, broaden their vision and prioritize multiple stakeholders, including employees, customers, academics, NGOs, communities, states, and even nations. In other words, the role of business is evolving. Success can no longer be measured by profit alone, but by the positive impact a company has on society and the attainment of peace. The good news is, in my view, this shift towards stakeholder capitalism is well underway. Around the world, more companies recognize that long-term value comes from serving the interests of all stakeholders, and that doing the right thing can also drive profitable, sustainable growth. While unbiased, one inspiring example of this new model is Salesforce, a global company of which I have the honor of being a member of its board of directors. Salesforce has very effectively woven social responsibility into its core values. It has made sustainability and equality central to its mission, proving that one can truly do well by doing good. The CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, a good friend of mine, has often said, and I truly believe this to be true, the business of business is to improve the state of the world. By prioritizing all stakeholders, not just shareholders, Salesforce aligns profitability with ethical responsibility. This approach sets a standard emulated by many companies in my country as well as around the globe. It shows that stakeholder-focused strategy doesn't hinder success. Rather, it fuels innovation, builds trust, and drives long-term growth while contributing to the broader well-being and peace of society. Hiroshima's message to us all, which I completely endorse, is that peace should be part of the corporate ethos. As we just heard, the Hiroshima Declaration emerging from this forum calls on businesses to expand their commitment from ESG to ESGP, adding peace as the fourth pillar. This evolution from ESG to ESGP underscores the critical role companies play in sustaining peace. Just as firms set goals for reducing carbon footprints or improving labor practices, they are now encouraged to set goals for promoting peace. Now, by internalizing peace as a core value, businesses can help build a more stable and just world. Peace should be more, much more, than a passive outcome. It should be a strategic priority for all businesses. In short, peace is everyone's business. Embracing P in our ESG framework cements that principle in corporate strategy. Now, I acknowledge that this broad vision isn't universally accepted without challenge. Unfortunately, in my own country, the United States of America, there has been political resistance to the ESG movement, even attempts to dismiss these principles. The America First mindset has pressured businesses to step away from ESG initiatives and by extension, ESGP, fueling an anti-ESG sentiment. This backlash might tempt companies to retreat to old ways of thinking, but it is critical, in my view, that business leaders not be intimidated or deterred, and that we hold them accountable. In the face of criticism, business leaders must redouble, and I repeat that, redouble their efforts, continuing to invest in sustainability, equality, and peace, because we know these efforts drive long-term prosperity and stability in the world. True leadership means looking beyond short-term political wins and keep a steady eye on the future that we all want to create. We must remember that the principles behind stakeholder capitalism and ESGP are about resilience and vision for decades to come. Now, I am hopeful, very hopeful, about the future of ESGP. Yes, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us, but we undertake it together with a shared purpose. It is important, in my view, that we move forward as businesses, governments, and communities, united in the conviction that peace and prosperity can advance hand in hand. I look forward, Mr. Chairman or moderator, I look forward to our discussions today and to the collaborative actions that will follow from this very important conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Roos. That's very excellent presentations and proposals. So next speaker is Professor Jimbo. So could you show some of your view about international relationships and the complex world economy?
はい、ありがとうございます。
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me for this forum. As Dr. Professor Yanagawa said, for the purpose of discussion, allow me to speak in English.
I concur with Ambassador Roos that how pleased I am to be invited to this prestigious forum, and always my pleasure to come back to Hiroshima. I'd like to present three basic aspects about the interconnectivity between geopolitics and business sectors and market as of today. As I'm a geopolitical specialist, and many of my thinking is coming from the direction of the geopolitical reality, and then how that might affect on the business environment. My first point is the geopolitical environment demands every business leaders to make strategic judgments. And because every major business decision, where to invest, who to partner with, and what technologies to adopt, now carries geopolitical consequence. And it is increasingly become hard to find a place of neutrality among those business leaders and also all the business decision by saying that we are not really taking sides of the geopolitics. We're considering the profits. But I think because the nature of the markets are now very much overshadowed by the geopolitics, starting from US-China strategic competition on the comprehensive fields of the economy. And also there has been the securitization, so-called securitization, everything that comes to the national security of the market. And eventually there has been a spillover effect of the disruption by the physical conflict. And used to be, many says that geopolitics and free markets can be separated because that there has been a resiliency of the market price, settlement mechanism, exchange rates, investment environments are all gone. But now it is increasingly intertwined with each other. And that requires the business decisions by the leaders interconnected with the geopolitics. That's number one. And the second dimension is when you invest for the future, especially on the business innovation, it is at the heart of the national security. And fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, semiconductors, and also those related with biotech are no longer just the engine of the growth, but they are also treated as strategic goods by the government sectors, so that they are, overshadowed by the tightened export control, internal investment screening processes, and also the tight control over the government procurements. So that our future lies in a much more, the geopolitical environment, and that as a timeline to look at the future, they are also strategized in a much more deeper manner. And number three, as I mentioned that how the business environments and strategy are intertwined, but I would like to present here that it doesn't really mean that US-led friendshoring, or you really have to have those like-minded states coalition, is the only path forward for the business leaders. I would like to mention that the U.S.-China strategic competition is still dominant structures that everybody needs to place your recognition as the outset. But also we really need to pay emerging attention to the emerging economies and the global south, like India, UAE, Qatar, those Gulf countries, and other global south players creating the multipolar environment, including those future technologies fields like AI and quantum. And they are making so much difference to the future prospects. So for the business leaders, this calls for nuanced and also, which means that you really need to think about security on one hand, but also you emphasize the importance of the openness and alternative partnering on the other. So that I think that those are quite creating a complex environment for the business leaders to make decision, but I think it's at the same time very innovative period of time for the business, or every business leader to make a decision.
Thank you very much, Jimbo-san. I understand that the reality of geopolitics is not so easy, very severe, so that's complex, and we should consider about the strategy of even the business side. So, do you have any comments or questions about it? Mr. Peterson, please.
Yeah, let me start. First of all, you mentioned, Jimbo-san, you talked about the AI being a critical factor, and you also talked about the Global South. But I want to ask you a question about energy, because you mentioned the Middle East countries, and in the past, one of the most important themes, geopolitical themes, was the security and the supply of energy, especially when we were in the petro situation, where that was the most important source of energy, oil, gas, coal. How do you see the geopolitical evolution going on around energy?
Well, I think that energy, since 1970s, is the heart of geoeconomics. And when you look back the 1970s of Japanese foreign policy prioritization is concerned, it is a securing of the sea lanes of communication connecting the oil producers and then all the secure imports to Japan is the heart of our national security concerns. So when it comes to the rule-based international order, multilateralism is why those are important, because it's a critical national interest for Japan. So that the energy comes into play for the energy producers, they can be utilizing as strategic assets to leveraging, to influence to the world. But many in the world, energy to be imported. Many in Asia, like Japan, Korea, many of the Southeast Asian countries, in that sense that how emphasize the importance of the rule-based economic order is at the stake of the national strategy. That's one thing. And the second, rise of AI and also the importance of the data center really demands that the stable supply of energy is a place of the national strengths. And that really affects on our medium-term energy demands perspectives that will really change the composition of the energy sources once again to our national energy strategy. So it really creates the huge, I think, impacts on the energy policy across the world.
Can I ask a question? Sure. I have a question. First of all, very interesting presentation. My whole career, prior to having the incredible opportunity and honor of being the ambassador to Japan, but my whole career prior to that and after was in the Silicon Valley. And in the 1980s and 1990s, the tech leaders had no interest in Washington or really thinking globally beyond their businesses. Now, as we see, these tech leaders are international leaders and figures and controversial in many respects. What is your thought with regard to that? And how do these tech leaders prepare themselves, not only to lead incredible companies that are changing the world, but really to deal with and think strategically about these geopolitical issues?
Thank you. I should not be the one to dominate all the answers, but we are very fortunate to have Dr. Chris Miller to be speaking tomorrow, and his main theme is that the connecting those emerging technologies and also to the national security. And I think that if you look back the history of the evolution of the technologies of the on the military domain, now is the time that the emerging technology will be the game changer. And whoever really customize its own semiconductors to the much more precisely guided missiles, sensors, radars, and then also to the drones, autonomous systems, can really create the advantage in the battlefields. If you imagine that the military, one is AI ready and one is not, I think that the consequences will be devastating in a sense. In that sense, who really leads the processes? That is the tech company, and who can really materialize those technologies into the practical use. I think those are the dual-use technologies, but in my fields of the military domain, it is very detrimental that who really leads the processes.
Can we flip that question back to you? You have spent a career in Silicon Valley, from semiconductors to PCs to then the mobile phone to internet, et cetera. What are you seeing for AI? How revolutionary is it going to be?
Unbelievably revolutionary. You know, I've been in Silicon Valley since 1980. And as you mentioned, Doug, I've gone through these different waves of innovation. Nothing compares to what we're going through right now. And that is, I'm not alone in that view. That is the general consensus. And this is overall very positive. I mean, it can prevent pandemics and, you know, in the healthcare area and financial service. I mean, you name it across the board. This generative AI is a game changer for corporations, individual states, and nations. There's also a sobering negative side to it, where we need guardrails. And that's a huge challenge, and we'll see how that plays out. As someone who's obviously deeply invested in US-Japan relations, I see our two countries as real potential leaders in both the development of these technologies as well as the acceptance and adoption of guardrails. So we're in I mean, you guys are experts too. We're in a new era that is really beyond our wildest imaginations, I think, what we're going to see as this plays out.
Could I add another question while you're still fresh on it, which is, you mentioned in your original presentation that peace must be more than a passive outcome. I don't think there's anyone in the room that would disagree with that. But I'm really interested, from your experience, and particularly board experience, how do you introduce that as a topic of discussion at the board level? And what sort of language do you use to make that conversation meaningful at the board level?
Well, and I think we've all touched on it. First of all, you know, and I don't want to keep pointing to the board to the company I'm on the board of, but, you know, Salesforce, it was in our DNA from the founding of the company. So, you know, at the highest level, it's best for the leaders to have that, you know, ingrained in them, you know, from the very beginning. But I think that the approach is, and we've touched on this, in order to be a good board member, you have to take into consideration, the company has to take into consideration all these geopolitical issues, because the company will not succeed unless it does. And that really has been a change in mindset and is continuing to change. So most, in my career, I had a legal career prior to going to Japan, representing the major tech companies in the Valley. As I said, it wasn't part of their thought process. Now it has to be. And so, in the boardroom, you have geopolitical discussions at the top of the agenda, not as an afterthought. So I think it's something that every company and every board member really needs to internalize, but really has begun to do so.
If I may, I also like to ask a question to Ambassador ROOS.
I'm not supposed to get all the questions.
Okay, I'll make my own points, and then I would like to know your response. ESGP and the peace is a fascinating concept that Declaration has adopted. My question is, what kind of implication that technologies can contribute to this peace concept? For example, when you look at the current process of the Ukraine peace negotiation, you have to have a ceasefire, you have to freeze the borderline, and you have to monitor whether that such kind of ceasefire has been, protected. But you cannot really deal with it, but with all the long border lines and who is doing what. And that has to be monitored by the technologies. And whenever you think about the so-called deterrence by detection, is there any kind of actor who is going to violate the status quo needs to be notified to the world? And these are I think one of the examples how technology can really change to contribute to the peace. But the technology can be disruptive when it is misused or escalating the conflict. And ambassadors, how do you think that those like a newly emerging technology can contribute to the P part?
Well, let me give you an example. We do and we don't focus on it, but the future of warfare is going to include cyber attacks. And in cybersecurity, there's incredible innovation that's going on a daily basis. So when you look at the fact that, a war between China and the United States and, could be initiated through the cybersphere, there's, amazing advancements being made in the area of cybersecurity that can help prevent that. So that's just an example of how technological innovation can contribute to peace. And there are many examples.
It's a very interesting discussion. I'd like to continue this one, but the time is limited, so we're going to the next topics. And Mr. Peterson, could you tell us the relationship between the peace and the financial market?
Yes, thank you very much. And let me start by mentioning that I will talk about public-private partnerships. That's something that's so important for Marcus. I want to thank Governor Yuzaki, because he's one of the best examples of public-private partnership anywhere I've ever seen. And so thank you for that, and congratulations. I'm going to share a few slides. Let me see if I can get them up. I'm going to talk first about war. I know that we're here to talk about peace, but I want to talk about what is the impact of war on an economy. And when wars take place, they have a significant problem. They have dislocation, social dislocation. There's populations that have to move around. You see production problems. The average war this is studying hundreds of wars, has an impact on an economy of 7% drop in the GDP. At the same time, inflation goes up over 8%, 8 percentage points. You see that the exports drop, imports drop, production moves from productive production, which is going to be for people's well-being, and it goes to weapons. You also see, obviously, death and destruction. So there's nothing good that comes out of war. And you see all of these different impacts end up also then hitting the GDP. GDP drops, inflation goes up. In addition to that, you see what happens with sovereign debt. And the worst cases are when you have a long-term, protracted, deep war. You can see economies drop by over 40 to 70%. And the largest wars in history have seen the drops up to 70%, with Italy and France on two different sides of World War II seeing drops almost 70% in their growth, and a very long recovery period that was required. Now, we have a case that's going on right now in Ukraine. Ukraine, the first year that after they had the invasion and the war from Russia, their economy dropped 30%. It was a very large drop, and if it went down even further after that. If their economy, if the war stopped today, it would still take them at least 5 to 6 years to recover to where they already are. And what's happened to that economy? That's a breadbasket country. They produce grains, in particular wheat. They have the wheat that's the type that's used in the Middle East and Northern Africa. That wheat exports dried up. Their exports first dropped 35% in the first year, and they're now down over 50%. In addition to the breadbasket, they also produce critical minerals and oil and gas. Those productions are also down 50 to 75% because there's no way to extract those minerals as well as get them out of the country. In addition to that, they have 7 million people from their population have left. They're refugees across Europe and other parts of the world, with the bulk of them having gone to Poland. And so this is a case study. You can see what's war. There's nothing good about war. And you can see what's happening to a place like Ukraine. You can also see what's happening in the Middle East. And I think many of you remember what was called guns or butter. If you ever studied Economy 101 in college, there's this chapter that's about, well, what happens to economy if you invest in guns or butter? And we have a real-life case study, which is Korea, the two Koreas. You can see what's happened over the last 50 years between North Korea and South Korea in terms of their per capita GDP. What happened to North Korea over the last 50 years? They've invested in guns, no butter. It's an economy that has no foreign direct investment. They basically have no exports. They have no market economy, and the government runs everything, and it's a centralized, controlled economy in a permanent wartime position. Their GDP has basically been flat. It's about $650 a year right now per capita, if you can believe that. Versus South Korea, this is in 2017 numbers, but measured in 2023. South Korea has had an incredible success story in the butter side of the guns versus butter. So this is a contrast of two countries right next to each other, this case study of guns versus butter. South Korea in the 1970s, as they started an export-led investment economy, was growing at over 10% a year. And they continued into the 80s and 90s. They diversified from simple textiles and simple assembly into automobiles, shipping. They also have a very active electronics industry, in addition to things like cosmetics and their services. They're exporters of boys bands and media on Netflix. And so South Korea is an incredible success. And you can see this huge benefit of having an export-led investment economy, consumption economy. And we could spend a lot of time on this, but let me now switch to the topic of what I call the virtual cycle of sustainability, that you can think about the role of financial markets. Why are financial markets so important? And reflecting a little bit on the prior discussion, if you look at what the needs are for development finance around the world, the numbers are mind-boggling. They're staggering. It's in the multiple trillions of dollars every year that's needed to invest in energy transition, and new infrastructure. And this doesn't just include the investment that's needed in the emerging markets in Africa and Asia and Latin America. This is also needed in Japan, in the United States, and Western Europe. We know that in the United States, we need to redo our grid. We need to redo our airport air traffic controller system. We need to upgrade many of our energy resources. We need to put in a new road system. Our railroads need investment. And so if you include all of the investment globally, it's at least $4 trillion, including infrastructure, what I call economic infrastructure, as well as social infrastructure, which is hospitals and education systems. Now, why do I talk about this in the light of financial systems? We need the capital to deliver, to upgrade the infrastructure around the globe. And it's also a dire need in the developing markets. This is where there's a virtuous cycle when you start investing for the long run and long-term investing in financial markets. You can see what's happened in markets that are only focused on banking sector. When you move to the insurance sector, you move to pensions, you move to long-term capital. You can start seeing that long-term capital matches up with the needs of healthcare and infrastructure and pension systems, so you can get a virtuous cycle. We have that in markets like Japan, the United States, and Europe. We need to recycle that capital faster, and we also need to recycle that capital with the support of the multilateral development banks to the emerging markets. Finally, let me mention that in the sustainability space, Ambassador ROOS talked about what they do at Salesforce, which is a great example of a company that believes and lives in sustainability. And there are many, many companies around the globe who have been taking leadership. I've been involved in many different initiatives over the years and looking at what should be the corporate and global financial infrastructure for sustainability standards. Right now, what's called the International Sustainability Standards Board, or the ISSB, fortunately, Japan is actually going to be implementing that. They're the first major economy that's implementing ISSB for a disclosure standard for their companies. You had what before that was a precursor was the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. That's become quite commonly adopted around the globe of major global financial and corporations. So these are the standards that we should be pushing for. We need to find standardization. The more we can find a way to do this in a simple way. One final comment related to the S&P 500 in the US. Right now in the S&P 500, about 90% of the companies are already reporting almost everything you need to comply with the ISSB. It's just that they're in different kinds of reports. They have a community report, an impact report, a climate report, a community report, a CSR report. Because there's no standardization, everybody's doing it however they want. And so I would pause here and talk about, I'd like to pause here and just say that one of my pleas is to let's try to get this standardization. We need this information so that we can be able to measure the change. It also will be one of the ways we can attract the capital.
How do we get that standardization?
Well, there's a group called the IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissioners. They're the group that is working to try to standardize that. Europe actually went too far. They ended up with standards that were so onerous that even the European companies were coming to me and to American companies saying, please help us. We're going too far. We're not going to be able to do this. Let's pull back to the ISSB standard, which is a more simplified standard for financial disclosure. But we need to go through these groups like IOSCO, the World Economic Forum, and others to have this dialogue. I'd say the G7, the G20, but I think IOSCO is probably the best to focus on because it is the securities regulators that require financial reporting.
Thank you very much. Very clear presentation and message. So,
my question is related to what I raised a few minutes ago. I think great point about those S&P and those impact reports. And we're now proposing the ESGP. If you try to insert the P into those index, and what could be the detailed index that you want to have in your mind?
Yeah, I had a discussion last night about that in the reception, and I think it's going to be really critical for us to use organizations like the IOSCO and WEF and ISSB to start talking about what are those indicators for peace. And I want to actually reflect on, you talked about Salesforce. Let me talk about S&P Global. At S&P Global, as an organization, we have a vision, which is powering global markets. That's what we do. We have values, which are integrity, partnership, and discovery. Discovery is actually one that's quite fun because it means that you're creating an organization with curiosity and finding ways to be innovative. But our purpose is to accelerate progress. And that goes back to 1860 when the firm was first founded. And in 95 years ago, S&P Global was first listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I was the 10th CEO for 11 years of that company. And by looking at the history, I was able to find that across those 160 years of the organization, there were always places where S&P Global was helping accelerate progress through financial markets and information. We first were founded when railroads and canals were moving the United States to the West. We were there to finance the Panama Canal. We were there, we didn't do the financing, we provided the information that people used to do the financing. We were there to help people buy homes. We were there to help people be able to retire because they can finance for the long term. We're now financing through our information. We're providing the data what's needed for markets to have energy transition, for the AI revolution. And so we came up with this idea that what our firm does is it accelerates progress. And I'm now thinking about peace. This is going to be something that's foundation of ESGP. It's peace, it's progress, it's impact. I'd say that right now there's a really critical dialogue going on in the sustainability world around the difference between risk and impact. And I would say that when we talk about peace, we need to move away from risk and talk about impact, because that's where you really see the difference of the ESG movement. And this is how you're going to incorporate peace, is to talk about impact.
Any other? This is very critical and punchline of this argument. Also, that's which I would like to discuss more, but I should move on to the next topic. So, Mr. Ruiz, could you show us how this corporate governance and the peace, or this kind of relationship?
Yes, thank you very much, and I, of course, echo my my fellow panelists' gratitude to the governor and to you, Professor, for the very warm welcome we've received here in Hiroshima, as ever. I've had the privilege of being a journalist in Asia for the last 23 years, most of that in Japan, but when I returned most recently 10 years ago in 2015, that was the introduction of Japan's corporate governance code, and I don't think that enough is being done to celebrate its 10th birthday this year, because in my view, this document and the courage, the political courage that it took to introduce it is one of the most significant moments for my time covering Japan. I think that what's happened since the introduction of the governance code is that there have been, let's say, some shortcomings in the way that it's been presented and the way that it has been used. And I think that the perception of the governance code in Japan, and to Japanese companies in particular, has underplayed its future value. I think if Japan and Japanese companies started to see the governance code as an ally rather than as a stick that's been used to beat Japanese companies, that it would have an enormous value relevant to the topic under discussion today. I think also that the confidence that Japan could show in embracing that code and making it feel like an all-Japanese document rather than as something that has been imposed by the outside world would add to its value. I'd like to make just one or two points about that argument. I think that when the code was introduced, it's been through a couple of revisions since then, but in its early form, it really was pretty comprehensive. And it set certain standards that I would say, by and large, were not necessarily being met universally across corporate Japan. But I think that it was immediately taken up by parties who really wanted to use it as a strong criticism of corporate Japan and of the norms of corporate Japan and of its attitudes towards particularly shareholders. Japanese companies, I think, have had an admirable balance between the different stakeholders, and I think that there was a view that the governance code was going to be used to leverage a fundamental change in that balance, and that change in balance was not going to be healthy for Japan. I think that the association with the governance code and an insistence that Japan was doing it wrong was unfortunate, because I think that Japan was doing a great deal that was right. I think also that the governance code was cited as in many cases, as too simplistic a solution to some of Japan's more complicated problems to do with capital allocation, productivity, efficiency, and other issues that afflict companies not just in Japan, but everywhere in the world. That said, I think that we were provided over the last 10 years with some very good examples of where governance shortcomings have been detrimental to a wide number of stakeholders in Japan, despite the efforts of companies. So I think if we look at Toshiba, perhaps Nissan, other examples, at the current moment, Seven and I, we can look at governance shortcomings and decide that actually those shortcomings have not served the broader stakeholder base, as well as not serving the shareholder base. But I think that I think that perhaps oversimplifies again what the governance code could be doing, and again how relevant it could be to the matter we have in hand. I think that the fundamental message of the governance code is that Japan and its companies in particular simply need to be better at explaining how they reach their decisions. It's not about whether those decisions are right or wrong, but that there should be greater confidence in the process that has arrived at them. And I think that when we talk about the idea of corporates generally, corporate Japan, playing an active role in what we've been discussing today, it's the confidence that the decision-making process is clean, that it's transparent, that it has diversity behind it, that it's free from conflict of interest, and that it is consistent. Those are the fundamental tenets of the governance code. And I don't think that because in some cases the code has been hijacked by people who simply want to make a bit of money out of Japan and out of Japanese companies, that invalidates in any way the pressure that the code imposes on Japanese companies. And so I think it may be that a fuller embrace of the governance code does lead to Japanese companies continuing to do what they have done so well. I think that when you consider ESG as a threesome, we're now going to consider ESGP. When you look at the E and the S elements of those, Japanese companies have been, by and large, very impressive. Where there have been shortcomings in the G aspect of that, and there have been, that's clearly an area for improvement. But if you follow the code to its letter and simply use it to improve the decision-making process, then I think that the outcome for the P side of this is more or less guaranteed as a topic of serious discussion, which is why I asked Ambassador ROOS the question about how you would introduce that at the board level. Since it's come up, I do think that it is very reasonable to interpret what's going on in US politics as a governance failure. That I think that if you look at what I just mentioned, transparency, diversity, freedom from conflict of interest, and consistency, the absence of those elements in the current White House setup is exactly the kind of governance problem that creates geopolitical issues that my colleagues were so excellently describing earlier. And so I think that, and there was an allusion to this earlier, Japan's version of stakeholder capitalism may ultimately be proved to be closer to the desirable reality than some other versions of it. But I think that it will only be provably so if Japan is able to make, Japan is able to make the argument that it has arrived at that version of stakeholder capitalism through a proper system of governance. And so I would use this 5 minutes that I've been very generously given to say that for the furtherance of these goals, that Japan should cherish the governance code and its 10th anniversary as a thing of its own creation and for its own benefit. And so with that, I'll hand back to my colleagues, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So any questions or comments about that?
I want to echo your discussion about the governance code, and if I look at it as a snapshot instead of kind of continuously, it's actually pretty amazing where we were. I remember 10 years ago that activist investors were not welcome, and now there's plenty of them around in private equity firms. But I wanted to ask that question about the aspect related to activism and private equity and how that's playing in this rethinking of the Japanese corporation.
So in those 10 years, you're exactly right that it's not been a step change. It's been a series of small moments of progress. But what I would say is that if you talk to activists, when we talked as journalists to activists 10 years ago, they had very simple demands of Japanese companies, and they were almost consistently to do with give us more dividend, do a share buyback, raise your return on equity for the benefit of shareholders. What's undoubtedly the case now, and we're coming up to the June AGM season, and that's always a good gauge of how shareholders and companies are interacting and whether it's successful or not. The conversation has become much more strategic, that shareholders are now engaging with companies in strategic discussions that they wouldn't have had 10 years ago. And those have to do with non-core assets, in many cases to do with the shape of the company and its mindset. One thing that I would note as an interesting statistic that we have looked at very closely is to do with the diversity, the industrial diversity of Japanese companies. So on average, an American or European company is exposed to 1.5 different industries. A Japanese company on average is exposed to 2.5 industries. And so it's difficult to find pure Japanese companies in the way that it's easier to find pure companies in the US or in Europe. And I think that the fact that the shaping of those Japanese companies is now part of the discussion between shareholders and those companies is the biggest change that I've been able to report on.
Can I ask one other question?
Yeah.
You have a background also in China, and you mentioned the current, what you talked about, the governance of the administration in the US. So putting aside what's happening in the US, what do you see happening in Asia with the corporate sector, as well as this dialogue about the trade dynamics? What does it mean for geopolitics, for relationships with China, with other countries, et cetera? How do you look at that? What coverage are you doing around that?
Well, there are far greater historians of Japanese corporate history than me. But one of the most, I think, damaging images of Japan was that it was all a stitch-up between the government and the corporate sector. And that in some way, as it were, the state-owned sector in China has a rough equivalence with the way that Japanese companies interact with the government. I don't believe that to be the case. I think that Japanese companies have a very significant independence from the government. But I think when you look elsewhere around Asia, that independence is much less clear. And so the behavior of corporates, even in South Korea, since you bring it up, and certainly in China, but you know, in the rest of Southeast Asia. I think the independence of companies here is a goal that the rest of Asia should be aspiring to, even if we're still burdened with the image in Japan of a picture that was formed perhaps 30 years ago in the late 80s and perhaps into the early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Is there time?
Please. Yeah, it's okay. Please.
The very interesting presentation. You know, when I first came to Japan, it was all about stakeholder capitalism. And in the US, it was shareholder value. And I remember saying, you know, where's the right balance in there? And now with the corporate governance code in Japan, there has been more emphasis on shareholder value. And in a way, I think Japan has found the right balance between, you know, stakeholders and the shareholders being one of those stakeholders. And that Japan is in, because of that, is in a very strong position to put the P, you know, into the ESG. Do you agree with that? Because I also have say the U.S. has learned a lot from Japan in that regard, and it has gone more from all about shareholder value to more of a balance on the stakeholder capitalism. Do you agree with that thinking?
Very much so. I do, and I'd be very interested to know what Doug thinks of this as well. The sense that both Japan and the US were at either end of a very wide spectrum, and that both of them are actually heading towards a middle. I think that is the story of the last sort of 5-6 years. I think that you're starting to hear, or you certainly were starting to hear noises in the US that say, well, hang on, companies have a wider purpose. But I think on the Japanese side as well, the very heavy emphasis on corporate survival, which is an admirable thing in itself, and clearly Japan has done it very, very well. But I think it's not the be-all and end-all. I think that the endless survival of a corporate name is not necessarily as desirable as Japan has presented it, and that there is a value in the kind of creative destruction but it's somewhere in the middle. And I think that Japan is doing a good job of getting to that middle at the moment, yeah.
Let me mention that when it comes to Japan, what I think has been probably the strongest part of the corporate governance reform, in addition to independence in boards, has been, how do you think about capital allocation? The question about why do I have so much capital tied up in cross-shareholdings that I don't really have much of a relationship with or partnership with. They're not adding a lot to my capital allocation. Similarly, why do I have so much cash on my balance sheet? So I think that strategic dialogue around capital has been quite valuable, and that's one of the reasons that people like Warren Buffett is now quite attracted to Japan, because the capital allocation has shifted. In the US, I was on the board of directors of the Business Roundtable when we made the decision to change the purpose of a corporation from only creating shareholder value to looking at the stakeholder capitalism model. And it wasn't too controversial. It was controversial. Some people say, well, why do we need to do this? We're the Business Roundtable. But we wanted to make a statement. If the 200 largest firms in the United States are committing that their purpose is to serve all of our stakeholders. We had a lot of discussion about it, that if you don't serve the other stakeholders, your shareholders aren't going to be successful anyway. I know that's maybe a little bit cynical, but you have to have an environment where your employees feel rewarded, that they can grow, that they're going to develop, and you have to treat your customers fairly. You have to respect your customers, and you have to respect the community around you, and you have to have the right relationship with the government and the regulator. So it makes so much sense, and the most well-run companies already had that kind of a model, the way they were running their businesses, like you say with Salesforce. And so for most of the companies in the Business Roundtable, it was almost like a natural to shift that definition of stakeholder capital. One final comment I'd make is that you talked about purpose. In this day and age, young people won't join a company that doesn't have a purpose that they identify with.
I was just about to say that. The employees in all the companies I work with, the companies that are invested in stakeholder capitalism are more successful, higher morale. They want purpose, place, and meaning. And it's very, very important. And that creates this opportunity for peace, because when you look at that younger generation and what they're living through and what they're seeing right now, that is more important to them than ever.
Okay, so this is very exciting discussion, and I'm an economist.
Yes.
So I like to show my my opinion, but time is limited, so I have to wrap up this session. So
We want to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I say my opinion. So is there any last comment? Is that okay? Okay, so yeah. So thank you very much. So I should change my language to Japanese.
Right, please allow me to return back to Japanese. It has been a really fulfilling discussion. However, I wanted to continue this, but I had to finish this, and I'm going to wrap up in Japanese. And Mr. Peterson, we have received, as in his presentation, the peaceful environment is conducive to the economic activities. We live in this society right now, and this is really the kind of thing that we feel deeply about. And for this time onwards, we are going to discuss on this, and we really have to establish the peaceful environment in order to support the economic activities. And each individual and each company really has to make good contribution to that effect. And ASGP is the keyword which is going to bear extreme importance. That said, how can we concretize this to execute this? That is, there are a number of difficult things that we have to tackle, and that we have been able to recognize that during this discussion. Regarding the ESG activities, as in the discussion, in the corporate governance in the companies, to what extent the company has put this as their target to promote? To value the company as well as the value on the part of shareholders. Well, these are the things that they have been struggling, and there are no 100% correct answers as yet. However, the people have felt that in order to enhance the value of companies for a long term, the natural environment and the governance structures, those things have to be clearly put in place. Otherwise, you can enhance the share value for short term, but it's not to enhance the long term corporate value. That has been understood gradually, and in the financial market and the capital market included. So in order to enhance this long-term value, we have to have the sturdy or solid index for corporate governance. I think that is really the history of the Japanese company's development, in which not just environmental issues, but also the peace element would be have the public goods. If they have the meaningfulness as public goods, we really have to make the best use of it for companies as well. However, on top of the environmental issues, what kind of targets should we evaluate peace? How can we measure peace? Is the area which has still difficulties, and I think that has been pointed out in this discussion as well. And well, there are some kind of weapons, the development of which, is it to contribute to the peace? Well, it's not to contribute to peace, because that's the manufacturing of weapons. They're considered to be negative, but In a sense, as Professor Jimbo said earlier, the geopolitics in reality, the build up the weapons could contribute to the peace. Some people might think that way. So the not just only measurement, but what kind of activities we should execute, what kind of contribution we can make to peace through what kind of activities is really difficult things. But since it's difficult, so we're not going to discuss on that. No, we're not going to do that. We have to continue to ponder upon this in order for making this keyword more meaningful. And not just the definition of peace, but in the first part of the discussion, we have discussed that of the economic activities and international political activities and international political situations are closely intertwined. AI, what kind of development is it going to have, and how they are going to impact upon our security. The activities of AI itself, could be affected by the supply of energy. And who are to supply those sources of energy? That would impact AI, and eventually that would impact the security, then to business as a result. So once again, it has become very complicated. So, we have talked about the weapons, but it's not really the simple matter anymore. In our daily lives, in our daily activities, economic activities, those impact upon the security as well as peace, and eventually impact upon business. That is what we have been able to see in the discussion for these 2 days, and today and tomorrow. The variety of sessions, including AI, will be held. So in this complex society, we'll have to make clear definition and how we'll be able to promote of the P in ESGP is, we are not able to give you the full answer to that, but we have given you the opportunity to think about this. And also the importance of thinking about it. Well, the time is up, so that's all for this session. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, all the panelists, Dr. John Bruce, Dr. Douglas Peterson, Professor Jimbo Ken, Mr. Leo Lewis, as well as Professor Yanagawa.